My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
Hank Sheinkopf is a legendary Democratic strategist. Hank Sheinkopf worked as a meat cutter and a police officer before being introduced to political strategy and consulting as a union organizer. His first political campaign was for former Democratic Congressman Herman Badillo in his unsuccessful race for mayor. But Hank Sheinkopf has gone on to an extraordinary career in which he has worked in over 700 political campaigns across the United States and actually around the world. Hank Sheinkopf was a key member of former Democratic President Bill Clinton's re-election team in 1992. He also worked for independent New York City Mayor Mike Bloomberg and for the former president of the Dominican Republic, Leonel Fernandez. He has worked for a number of other entities, including Teamsters Local 237 and others. Hank Sheinkopf is a former contributor to CNN. His commentaries appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and Hank Sheinkopf has also worked as an instructor and a lecturer at NYU, Harvard University, Fordham University, and Brooklyn College. Hank Sheinkopf, welcome to the Roger Stone Show.
Well, I'm grateful for that introduction, and I'm kind of flattered by my own self, I have to tell you, but I'm mostly happy to be with you, Roger.
I really appreciate your being available because nobody understands national, state, and local politics like you do. So let's just jump right into it. Joe Biden. I would argue that the president's policies have brought the highest gasoline prices, record inflation, 76% increase in the cost of groceries. I have questions about the war in Ukraine and why we have no ongoing peace talks. Yet, in poll after poll, Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump seem to be locked in a near dead heat in most polls, with Trump holding a narrow lead. My reading of the country today is that the country is fairly evenly divided, which is, to me, somewhat surprising considering the distortion that I see, at least, in the general news coverage. So I guess a two-part question. How do you see this race unfolding? And does Joe Biden make it to the finish line, meaning will he be the Democratic nominee to begin with?
Well, good question. Second question first. No one gives up being the most powerful person in the world because they just decided to one day. It doesn't happen that way. The last person who did that voluntarily was not Richard Nixon, as you know, but Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1968. So that was 55 years ago. It doesn't happen. So Joe Biden leaving voluntarily doesn't seem likely. As for the outcome today, I believe Donald Trump, with the election held today, I believe Donald Trump would be the next president of the United States. I think the Republicans have an advantage from a message standpoint going into this contest with Trump as the nominee. He'll be seen, first of all, with these indictments as a victim, particularly in the heartland and in the South. He could pile up some real numbers because of all these indictments, which I think will backfire the way they've been done. Number one. Number two, the perfect ad would be to have Joe Biden looking like Joe Biden, and then cut to Kamala Harris with quotes from her, and then cut to Xi, the president of China. And you must remember that Americans do know that the Russians and the Chinese essentially invaded American sea space last week. And this is very, very serious. And you go to Xi, and then the screen goes to, who do you think is going to protect America? And you cut out. I mean, these are real issues that voters understand. And voters are not people who talk about taking the knee or whatever it is. They talk about service, communities, things, and basic bread and butter issues. I mean, it's just very difficult to see how Biden survives this right today. Now, we're talking, of course, in July of 2023, which is a long time away, because 5 minutes in politics is akin to 25 years in anything else. But that's my general sense of it, Roger.
You make a very good point about no president voluntarily relinquishing power. I read a terrific new book about the 1968 election by historian Luke Nichter. I'm about halfway through it. And he reveals that even though Lyndon Johnson dropped out shortly after the New Hampshire primary, he actually continued to consider jumping back into the race right up until the Democratic National Convention. He actually thought about helicopter landing into Chicago in 1968. Governor John Connolly kept arguing that Lyndon Johnson could be drafted to return to the political wars. There was a massive fight over the platform on the issue of Vietnam, and right up until the last minute, LBJ seriously considered jumping back into that race. It is kind of interesting that just this past week, on August 8th, was the 49th anniversary of the resignation of Richard Nixon, the only man to resign the presidency. President Trump has often said to me, Nixon should have stuck it out. Nixon should have fought. I think it's easy today in the internet age to lose sight of the fact that in 1974, you had a completely monolithic media. You had three major broadcast networks. You had a number of very influential news magazines, Time, Newsweek, Look, Life, and so on. You had really no national newspapers. You had very strong regional newspapers. The New York Times was not considered a national newspaper in 1968. Either was the Washington Post. So Nixon had no platform to avail himself some way to counterattack, some medium in which he could defend himself and launch a counteroffensive. So my question to you, Hank, is how has the internet changed American politics?
It has changed it radically in ways that we don't even understand yet. We used to be able to deal with papers. I mean, the press corps was as you've noted, monolithic, largely on the left. It's become now much more variegated. Talk shows don't have the value they used to have, only in so much as they can then be streamed on the internet and to targeted portions of the population. You can build a community online that has tremendous power, and you can force the press corps, what's left of it, or the traditional press corps, to cover the community you've created. This is very unusual, and the reporters can't set the agenda anymore. You have to understand that when it came to Nixon and the Watergate investigation, the rest, reporters set the agenda for the nation. You couldn't do that today. The politicians will kind of laugh them off because they can get around them. It's called to put the computer on, create a message, email into a certain group, come back to them, figure out what the metrics are. You'll know them in 72 hours, 96 hours to the outside, who's getting the message and who's receptive, and then go hit them again until you build a community through their links that is extraordinarily large. So it's entirely different. We don't even television doesn't have the capacity. I mean, we used to think that you could burn something in with 350 to 500 gross rating points, meaning that was that anywhere from 3.5 to that the 60% of a population in a particular area would see 3.5 to 5 impressions of an ad. It doesn't matter anymore because no one's watching. They're streaming. They're much more. They're able to control what they see, which was not the case in 1972, 3, 4, and 5 when Nixon met his political demise.
Interesting that the raid on Mar-a-Lago took place on the same day, August 8th, 49 years later. Just an interesting factoid. So the candidacy of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., to me, as a student of politics, I just find this extraordinarily interesting. I am obviously supporting my friend of 45 years, Donald Trump. I'm a supporter of his, but I am intrigued by the Kennedy candidacy for a couple of reasons. One, he's a Kennedy, and he still has the Kennedy magic. He is an incredibly compelling speaker. He's extraordinarily knowledgeable. He takes, yes, some very controversial positions, but he seems to be very adept at being able to defend those positions with government studies from foreign and U.S. sources. It's amazing to me how quick on his feet he is. Polling that I have looked at have shown that the peace and freedom issues, the economic issues, have a greater bearing both in the Democratic nominating process and at least right now in the presidential contest. You were part of the team who recognized in 1992 that it was the economy that was the driving issue in the upset, I would say, re-election of Bill Clinton. I based on everything I have seen, the discussion of vaccine safety and effectiveness is not propelling Kennedy's candidacy. It seems to me to be more the war and peace and breadbasket issues. Can Robert F. Kennedy, given the level of censorship that he is subjected to, can he get any traction?
Yes, he can, and it's an important moment in our history for a whole host of reasons. He is, I think, not in the same place on the political spectrum, but he's very much like Gene McCarthy was in 1968, if we're going to use means of analysis. From the outside, looking at issues differently, directed toward a younger portion of the electorate. But people forget that the same people that voted in many ways demographically for his father for president also voted for George Wallace and Jesse Jackson. That innate populism and a sense of unfairness that a large portion of the electorate feels is very much in place. It's a raw wound. Those that serve rather than be served are angry. Those that build communities are angry at the chaos they see in front of them. The electorate is much more conservative than we think on most issues, excepting abortion. And Kennedy is going to be able to grab, I would guess today, as much as 25 to 30% of the Democratic Party electorate by showing up. Why? Because people want someone new. The data shows that. They want someone not of the baby boomer generation. The data shows that. They want someone who's more direct future arguments they face, which are they going to be able to have anything like the lifestyle that the baby boomer generation had? Are they going to be, Kennedy can talk about that stuff. The others can't because they're badly positioned.
But it seems to me that he is forced to use essentially the new media. It's an internet-based candidacy. Has there been enough of a shift in the way people get their political news to the internet for him to be able to get his message across? In other words, as you and I know, one of the most revolutionary changes in politics brought by the internet is that it in a very specific way, it brought the cost of running for public office down. If you wanted to run for Congress on Long Island, for example, and Long Island is in the New York City media market, New York City broadcast television, even at the lowest rate, which you would be entitled to as a federal candidate, is still exorbitantly expensive. New York City radio, the real stations that people listen to, WABC, for example, because we reach so many millions of people, advertising here is not inexpensive. You get what you pay for. So does this shift to the internet, which in his case is a necessary shift, can that reach enough voters for him to get traction?
Well, the Kennedy candidacy will be the great test of that. Look, stations, we know that quarterly viewing, and television viewership is defined by how many people view on the quarter hour, right? That's how we measure. Is way down. Streaming is up. Other forms of receiving visual media are up, but television is dying as we know it. Were that not the case, you wouldn't see the you wouldn't see the kind of increases in media cost, purchasing costs that television is just going through. Why? They're trying to survive, and the corporations that bought stations and networks are trying to reap every dollar they can before the whole thing goes bust. It's only a matter of time before the networks don't matter. There'll be more combinations of networks. Are they important? They're important to people probably over 50, maybe even over 60. But they're not important in the same way as they once were when Walter Cronkite, Huntley and Brinkley, and I guess it would be, Robinson, was it Robinson? Yeah, controlled or were the most highly thought of people in the world because they were the anchor people. And every evening at 6 o'clock, you knew where America would be. Or as Johnson said, after Cronkite went to Vietnam and came back and had on his evening newscast said that the war was wrong. Johnson was quoted in the biographies as saying, "I've lost Cronkite, therefore I've lost America." Not the case. Television doesn't matter in the way it did. It matters to some, but not all. Therefore, Kennedy has an opportunity, if he can get around the crazy label, which is all over the internet. If he can combat that, he's got a chance not to win necessarily, but to certainly have an extraordinary impact and to change our politics forever.
Yeah, if I had $1 for every person on Twitter who has posted a one-time picture of me and Robert Kennedy and General Michael Flynn, because we all spoke at a conference together, alleging that I urged him to get into the race, not true. That I'm advising his campaign, not true. That I'm supporting him, not true. I like the idea that as a Democrat, he wants to seal our southern border. I like the idea that as a Democrat, that he seems to have real skepticism about the war in Ukraine. I saw a great interview with him this morning on the internet, watched it on Twitter, where he pointed out that Putin and Zelensky were very close, had a Minsk agreement, would have been a peace agreement that would have stopped the killing, but that was scuttled by our U.S. State Department. So I think he is extraordinarily compelling, but it is very easy to distort who he is on the internet. I don't think he's radical at all. I think he's well within the progressive mainstream of the Democratic Party. He is pro-abortion rights. I happen to be pro-life. He is a strong believer in climate change. I'm a climate change skeptic. Maybe that's because I'm a conservative Republican and he is still a progressive Democrat. Yet sealing our borders in order to end the drug and crime epidemic in the country doesn't seem to me to be a right or left position. It just seems to be common sense. So the real question is, can they so vilify him? Can they so build a caricature of him that it really disables his candidacy?
They can, and that's the problem here. The same way that those working for him can use internet communications to build a candidacy in a very different way, the other side can do the same, and they can check the metrics almost instantly or within reason. I mean, we used to have to wait much longer to find out the real impacts of television ads. Now we know pretty quickly and for less money exactly what's going on. They need to be able to focus, that Kennedy campaign does, on very, very clear, defined geographic locales for, immediately off the top, it's Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada. Their arguments in many ways are much more progressive as we would define them, i.e. sealing the border and protecting American labor, which is the underlying argument there. Whether true or not, it's a very labor union left idea. Okay, there's nothing unusual about that. His father and Gene McCarthy ran for office in 1968 on a pledge to effectively to end the war in Vietnam. Ending the war in Ukraine and American involvement is something to consider. The name, getting enough information online that uses the name as a means to communicate with the black people, Latinos particularly, who would remember or who will be reminded and educated about the La Raza in California that Cesar Chavez and the union organizers fought there to organize the farm workers, is a serious, serious thing to do. I mean, there's paths for him. And it could change, I believe, American politics forever. We are in a very important and difficult and potentially dangerous period of time where the parties have completely broken down. Their values are upside down. And it's not clear whether people identify by party or by other devices. But what we do see is parties that are scrambling to find definition and not being very successful at it, but rather finding individuals to identify with. And that's the reason why the Republicans look in better shape than the Democrats do right now.
How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
This episode is brought to you by Chevrolet. When you have 4 new tires, every drive feels fresh. Right now, buy 3 select tires and get 1 for just $1 during the Chevrolet Certified Service Fresh Start Tire event. Visit Chevrolet.com/service offers or see dealer for full details. At participating U.S. GM dealers only, highest or equal value tire will be $1. Offer ends 5/31/2025. Not available with other offers.
This episode is brought to you by Loom by Atlassian. Are you feeling stuck at work? Get your team unstuck with Loom video messaging and move work forward. Use Loom to simultaneously record both your screen and yourself to share a quick update, provide feedback, train a colleague, and everything in between. Plus, add Loom AI to your meetings for instant written notes and recordings. Try Loom today at Loom.com. That's LOOM.com.
Now, Hank, you are an ordained rabbi. You're a man of God. I know that you prayed for me and my family when we were going through great distress. Have you examined these claims that Robert Kennedy is in some way anti-Semitic? And what is your conclusion?
I don't think he's anti-Semitic. I think that he doesn't understand how to speak in sound bites. And I think that that is a problem for a political candidate, even more so in the social media age, because what you say is more easily distorted. If he'd said what he said in a soundbite, as opposed to linking different groups, people wouldn't say he was an anti-Semite. And frankly, he is a strong supporter of the state of Israel, as any rational person would be who cares about America, not because we love Jews, but because we love not eating grass. Harry Truman in 1948 understood that if you lost Greece and Turkey and the Mediterranean basin to the communists, that we would be eating grass here and we would have enemies off the coast of New York. The people in government today, the AOCs and the other misread and ahistoricals, don't understand the value of that relationship, not because we love Jews, but because we love protecting America. Kennedy understands both those issues, and I think to label him an anti-Semite is both unfortunate and unfair.
It does not appear to be true to me based on everything that I have read. I was very surprised by the decision by the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security not to approve Secret Service protection for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In 1968, after his father was brutally murdered on the night of the 1968 California Democratic primary, which he won, Congress passed a law that allowed the government to provide Secret Service protection for any qualified presidential candidate who applied for it. It was not automatic, although President Johnson ordered protection for every candidate, both Republican and Democrat, running that year. The Secret Service Department used to be under the Treasury Department. When the government was reorganized and the Department of Homeland Security was founded, the Secret Service was moved under DHS. Given the two things, given the murder of John F. Kennedy while serving as president, given the horrific murder of Robert F. Kennedy Sr., U.S. Senator from New York, former Attorney General of the United States, and given the fact that many on the internet and in public discourse whip up hatred and disdain for Robert Kennedy, my fear is that this might fuel some madman, some insane person to either hurt or kill Robert Kennedy. I just find this decision shocking. Hank, your reaction?
I am shocked by the decision as well. I want to go back a moment, though, Roger. We forget that Sirhan publicly said that he murdered Robert Kennedy because he was because of his support for Israel. I mean, to call the son an anti-Semite is patently idiotic. And as to protecting him, that's pure politics. We ought to provide protection. We spend extraordinary amounts of money on stupidity. Here is a clear case where a person with a name in a country where there are too many guns held by too many crazy people, where that is going on, that we ought to be able to protect him in the way we would any other candidate for public office. And it would be a disaster were anything to happen to him, and we have a responsibility to protect him. Simple.
So politics has changed radically. There have been an illustrious history of Republican governors in New York State. Andrew Cuomo left the governorship under very controversial circumstances, yet he continues to have, I think, in excess of $6 million in leftover campaign funds that he still controls. I noticed that he makes strategic appearances. I think I saw him at a very large synagogue in Long Island recently where he was speaking. He pops up occasionally on television. Do you believe that Andrew Cuomo, who, by the way, I will concede to you was a very skilled and very tough political operator, do you think there is a path back for him?
There is a path, Roger, and I think what you're asking is very important, but it's a difficult one. Governors, not just in New York, but around the country, are most successful when they're almost imperial, when they force things to happen. And there are many, many, many examples we can cite historically when that's the case. If you look at New York itself for a moment, coming back to the question, governors that have been successful have all told the legislature to take a hike, done what they wanted. George Pataki was very successful. Andrew Cuomo was successful. Hugh Carey was imperial. He said, look, New York City and New York State, get in line. We're bringing in the bankers to fix the problem. Or when the city and the state went bankrupt in 1975, and on and on and on. So more successful governors are much more imperial. Andrew Cuomo was. Can he win again? They want Andrew Cuomo without the Andrew. In other words, they want the Cuomo to straighten the mess out. That's what they're going to want come 2026. The issue for a governor like him is how do you deal with the women issue? And that's very significant, and it's hard to figure that one out. I think that it's very difficult to surmount. But the management issues that the state is experiencing and states throughout the country are going to experience from a financial and the chaotic perspective, every time the progressives take more ground, they make things worse for the electorate. It's a place where Andrew Cuomo could actually do well. How do you deal with the women issue? Not sure. If he can figure that out, he has a key to success.
Folks, if you're just tuning in, this is the Roger Stone Show on WABC Radio. We are at 770 on the AM dial. You can also hear us at WABCradio.com. So go to your cell phone right now, call a friend or text a friend, family member, someone you like who loves politics and good political discourse, and tell them to tune in, and remind them that we're here every Sunday from 3 to 5 in the afternoon on the Roger Stone Show. We're talking to Hank Sheinkopf, one of the most respected Democratic political strategists in the country. I challenge you this. Go do a Google News search on Hank Sheinkopf or Henry Hank Sheinkopf, and you will see that he is, without any question, one of the most quoted men in American politics. He is a go-to guy for every political reporter nationally, state, and locally who wants the straight story about what is going on. And I am very, very honored to have him on the show today. Hank, stories in the New York Times this week saying that progressives who seem to have made great strides within the Democratic Party have begun quiet discussions about recruiting a candidate to oppose current New York City Mayor Eric Adams. A two-part question. One, are the immigration policies of a Democrat president potentially destroying the ability of a Democrat governor to get reelected? And secondarily, does Eric Adams actually, in your opinion, have any vulnerability in the Democratic primary?
I think that the Democratic president is destroying the Democratic mayor, unquestionably. That the blaming of Washington for New York City's problems can only go so far. What they've done is they've given Adams a respite from what he inherited, which was a complete disaster from a budget and management standpoint of the city of the largest city in the nation, all done by a progressive named Bill de Blasio. Crime was up when Adams took over. Agencies were unmanageable. He has the long-term budget problems that de Blasio created. The capital budget which you would use to do infrastructure improvements was empty. I mean, so Adams inherited all this. Now he's got the migrants, and he's got crime problems, whether they're real or not, they're perceived that way. And he's got management issues, and he's still got budget problems, and it's all collapsing on him. Can he be beaten? The idiocy is that you can beat him from the left. If a left candidate runs and Adams runs in a primary, and there's a guy from the center or a woman from the center with real money who could make an argument about managing the city and turning it into a place where you can create jobs and reposition the economy, get rid of the politics and perceived corruption, which is going to have to be part of the argument, and make the police department function better, or the entire criminal justice system, that person has a shot. But you need a three-way primary to do that.
So there's a question I don't know the answer to. The New York State Republican Party is a shadow of its former self. Ed Cox, a good friend of mine who is returned as state chairman, is doing everything possible to change that. The Republicans ran a surprisingly strong race with Lee Zeldin. I think that had to do more with the unpopularity of the incumbent, Kathy Hochul. Do the Democratic Party organizations, what we used to call the machine, sometimes referred to as Tammany Hall, in this age of mass communications, do they still have any juice? Do they matter?
No, they don't. They can turn out some portion of the electorate, but not with the intensity. Although having a mayor that they can do business with is pretty good because they get jobs. That means at least they can get job holders to turn out and do work. But campaigns, as a function of the permanent campaign, have become largely entrepreneurial efforts. So Tammany Hall or some relationship to these organizations really doesn't matter. They're essentially job providers for a small group of people and arrangers of interest in the courts and places they do have some control, and the DAs that they do control, district attorneys. So what this has done is kind of upended politics because we don't have a clear sense of what party means anymore, and we don't have clear definition, and we don't have ethnic group allegiance to political parties. It just doesn't work that way.
All right, I'm afraid we have to end it about there. Hank Sheinkopf, without any question, in my opinion, one of the most brilliant Democratic political strategists in the country today, a hard-bitten veteran of over 700 campaigns. If I were a Democrat and I was running for any office at any level, he's the first man that I would call. Hank, we got 1 minute left. I'm going to give you the last word. Roger,
it would be better if we were all younger and we could view this through a different prism. But you know what? The system that we participated in is being challenged in ways that may not be solvable, and that is the great fear I have for this most extraordinary nation. May God protect it. Hank, you sent me a text this morning saying getting old is not for the weak. God bless you, my brother, and thank you for joining us on The Roger Stone Show here at WABC Radio.